Ellen R. Wald, PhD, is joining us to take a look at all things that relate to oil, OPEC, and we just had, obviously, the attack in Saudi Arabia, the drone attack, but I thought it was interesting now. They had the experts coming in, the oil service experts, and I know you know this, many months to fully repair the damaged facilities. There was a lot of talk it would be sooner than that, right?
Well, let's break down what exactly we're talking about here, because we're talking about very different things. Aramco had to, after the attacks, Aramco reduced its production by 5.7 million barrels of oil per day, and it had been producing about 9.8 million barrels a day, and that represented a complete shutdown of the oil facility that was attacked, and also a shutdown of the field that was attacked. Now, once they were able to get in there and restart the facility, I mean, keep in mind, all of the personnel working there were evacuated. So immediately, another 2 million barrels a day came back online as a result of just restarting this facility. Now, to repair all of this damage back to the way it was before is definitely going to take many months. That's for sure. It could even take a year. But the question isn't when is Aramco going to get back to its pre-attack situation. The question is, when are we going to see those barrels back in production? And that may happen a lot sooner because Aramco may be able to produce different crude grades. These facilities were designed to really process the crude and the sour crude and make it into light crude. Aramco can simply substitute and produce or send out less processed crude. So we may very well see barrels of oil produced back to, say, the 9.8 level quite soon, though the actual repairs to get everything back the way it was could take potentially months and months and months. Now, Aramco's top capacity is 12 million barrels per day, but they never produce that much. So the repairs could be made in other words, we may get that capacity back up to 12, but we may never even know because we'll never even see those barrels on the market.
So what you're saying is that this headline is sort of misleading to a certain extent because, I mean, I'm using rough. So roughly 50% was offline. Now they're building it back up to that 9 million barrels mark. And they can do that. It's just the different types of oil that they're putting out. And so it's not as bad as it seems. And actually, things are probably still pretty good for Aramco, right?
That is what I do. I do believe that. I think that the headline was misleading, or it wasn't precise. Let's put it that way. It wasn't perhaps as precise as it could have been.
So when we talk about, obviously, the IPO, they were going to bring this to market in the States. They started talking about this obviously getting in the way of that. Does that play into your mind at all?
Well, that's a big deal, and that's really a big question on everyone's mind because we had heard from, up until this attack, the news had been that the Saudis were planning to bring Aramco to do an IPO sooner rather than later, possibly as soon as November of this year on the Saudi Stock Exchange or the Tadawul Exchange. We hadn't really heard all that much about what the international listing might be. But now we're hearing conflicting information. Some people are saying the word on the street is that plans are going on as scheduled. They hope to do this IPO as scheduled. But then at the big press conference that happened last Tuesday, Yasser Rumayyan, who's the head of the Saudi PIF and who's now the chairman of the board of directors of Aramco, said that the IPO would be sometime in the next 12 months. So that's a very different tune from what we're hearing. So we're really all kind of waiting to see what they plan to do going forward. Now, the company is definitely capitalizing on its incredible recovery, its ability to deal with this disaster, and definitely putting a big effort into portraying itself in a positive light. However, it doesn't change the fact that they are vulnerable to these kinds of drone and missile attacks, and they are going to need to address that in any IPO prospectus.
Yeah, that's the other thing. Is the question is there's really not a lot of definitive information as to this drone attack details. I know there's been a lot of speculation about Iran, but it leaves it sort of open for more potential attacks. And the IPO is supposed to be huge. I mean, right? They hired UBS, they hired Deutsche Bank as the book runners for the IPO. But at the same time, there is still this element of risk.
Exactly. I mean, what bank isn't working in some respect on this IPO? It's hard to find a bank that isn't involved in this. But yeah, that's the question. But it also raises the specter of the fact that these attacks were so precise, so incredibly precise. This could happen honestly anywhere in the world. So what oil company shouldn't face any kind of risk premium now that we know that rogue groups have this ability to target an oil facility with such incredible precision? I mean, keep in mind, no one actually died in all of these.
Right.
No one died.
Let me ask you. I want to pick your brain.
So
I mean, you're the oil expert. When we look at all the other factors, I mean, OPEC's not due to meet anytime soon, and really their cuts are really set through next March, right? I mean, they're meeting in December, right? The 5th and the 6th. And then the cuts are really just sort of to stay until March. But I look at names like Halliburton and Schlumberger and Exxon and Chevron. What names do you watch most closely? What are the big players that we should be watching in the next few months?
Yeah, definitely the oil services companies like Halliburton, McDermott, but also, Exxon is a big bellwether company for this, but also Chevron, BP, Equinor, and Total as well. Those are all the really kind of big IOCs. But keep in mind, they're also not quite they're not balanced the same as Aramco is. Aramco is a very, very upstream heavy company. It has a lot more in terms of crude oil production than these other companies do. These other companies are much more diversified in terms of their share of refineries to upstream production than Aramco is. Plus, they've got assets all over the world, particularly crude oil assets. Aramco is focused entirely in Saudi Arabia, though its assets are spread out all across the country.
Right, and it's such a big deal what happened, no doubt. And it was about 50% of what they pumped out. But the truth is, in the global picture, it was maybe 5%, right? So how big of a deal is this? And if it were to happen again, I mean, we saw a big move in the price of oil. What happens and when does oil break out? I mean, it had this big move, but is still somewhat range bound.
Yeah, that's really a great question. So we definitely saw a big jump in prices right after it happened, and that was to be expected. And you're right, this is 5% of basically global oil supply, and that's a big deal. But it's not the biggest deal, because we have to remember this isn't the oil market of old. There are a lot of other players going on here. Russia is a major producer. The United States is a huge producer. So yes, Saudi Arabia is a special producer in that it always has the most spare capacity. It has the greatest ability to draw on its reserves, on its stored oil, to maintain the flow of oil, and it is the largest exporter. But it's not the largest producer right now. The United States and Russia both produce more oil than Saudi Arabia right now. And so it's not unexpected that we didn't see that jump in oil prices holding, particularly after the announcement from Aramco. Now, an interesting thing that we did see is that we did see China charter a whole bunch of ships to send them to the United States to load up on U.S. light crude, despite the tariff that China has placed on U.S. crude oil. And that's where I think we really have to watch what's happening, because oil is kind of stuck, particularly because of all of the negative economic news. Mm-hmm. But it could break out if we see any kind of breakthrough in the U.S.-China trade relations.
I'll watch for that. Eleanor Wald, PhD, author of Saudi Inc. It's great to see you. Thank you so much. And president of Transversal Consulting. Great job.